The Holocaust in Transnistria, giving voice to a silent history. Between 1933 and 1945, the Nazis and their collaborators persecuted and murdered 6 million Jews and millions of other innocent victims in what is known as the Holocaust, the intentional organized plan to annihilate all the Jewish people in Europe. The Nazis also killed 500,000 Roma and at least 275,000 people with disabilities. The Holocaust targeted Jews across the entire continent of Europe, but public attention has often focused on the victims of Poland and Western Europe, where the largest number of Jews were killed. Less attention is often given in America to the way the Holocaust unfolded in Eastern Europe. Due to the lack of sources until recent years, direct efforts under communist rule to hide details and language barriers. However, scholarships in the past 2 decades has highlighted one area, Transnistria, as a shocking center of Holocaust atrocities. In the years between 1941 and 1943, as many as 300,000 Jews were murdered in this narrow swath of land between the Bug and the Dniester rivers in what is today Ukraine. Odessa was the largest city in the area that would become Transnistria, one of the most important cities in the Ukraine. By the middle of the 19th century, Odessa had emerged as a dominant hub of Jewish culture, serving as a home to many of the most prominent Jewish nationalists, writers, and intellectuals. By 1939, 1/3 of the city's 600,000 residents were Jews, many of whom were involved in commercial enterprises related to the export of grain from what had become the largest port on the Black Sea. Altogether, 331,000 Jews had settled in Transnistria by 1939. In 1922, the area that would later be known as Transnistria was incorporated into the newly formed Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. In the wake of Nazis, Germany's invasion of Poland's September of 1939, the neighboring country of Romania claimed neutrality, but in 1940 was forced to cede portions of its territory to the Soviet Union, Hungary, and Bulgaria. Drawing on that humiliation, right-wing revolutionary forces gained power in Romania, imposing a policy of harsh anti-Semitic persecution and forging alliance with the Nazi Germany. In June of 1941, Nazi Germany attacked the Soviet Union. Romanian forces took revenge for the earlier loss of territory and joined the invasion. Romanian authorities also launched the Lassi program, a state-organized attack on the Jewish community of Lassi, the regional capital of the easternmost region in Romania. More than 13,000 Jews were killed, and thousands more were forced from their homes. After the conquest of Western Ukraine by German and Romanian troops in July and August of 1941, Romania retook the land that had been ceded to the Soviets 1 year earlier and annexed the territory between the Dnestr and the Bug rivers. Romanian authorities established a military administration in this area, which they named Transnistria. Trans meaning beyond, Nistria for the Romanian name of the Dnestr River. The Romanian army and the police, both on their own initiative, with the support of German SS police units, murdered between 45,000 and 60,000 Jews in the reclaimed territories of Bukovina and Bessarabia. They then herded the surviving Jews into ghettos and conscripted them into forced labor. Between July and December of 1941, those Jews still alive in those regions were deported to camps and ghettos across the Dnestr River in Transnistria. Many deportees died en route to Transnistria, either jammed into cattle cars without food or water, or marched by foot in the severe winter cold. Those Jews that made it to Transnistria were forced into the camps and ghettos run by the Romanian authorities and police and made to do back-breaking labor. But in 1941, Romanian authorities established ghettos and concentration camps in all 13 districts of Transnistria. In the Galter district, approximately 100 miles north of Odessa, 54,000 Jews were sent to the camp in Bogdanovka, 4,000 to the Commemoration camp, and 18,000 to the Mythgevacha camp. The crowding in Bogdanovka forced Jews to find shelter in barns, pigsties, and whatever other structures were available. When typhus broke out in Bogdanovka, and in the middle of December, Nazi advisors and the Romanian administrators decided to kill all the Jews in the camp. The mass murder started on December 21st, 1941, and was undertaken by a mixture of Romanian soldiers, Ukrainian police, and local civilians. Approximately 5,000 sick and disabled prisoners were locked into 2 stables, which were then burned down. The rest of the prisoners were marched in groups of 300 to 400 to the Bug River, where they were shot or killed with hand grenades. The killing continued for 4 days until a temporary halt was ordered on Christmas Eve. The massacre began again on December 28th. All 54,000 Jews in Bogdanovka camp were murdered in the span of 2 weeks. The mass murder in Bogdanovka, while the largest in Transnistria, was only one of the number of massacres held in this small region. One of the largest slaughters of civilians during World War II took place in Odessa, which finally fell to the German and Romanian military in October 16th of 1941, after holding out for longer than the surrounding areas. The exasperated Romanian army vented its frustration on the Jews in the city. Of the 70,000 to 120,000 Jews who had failed to evacuate with the Russians, 8,000 were killed in the first few days after the city was retaken by the Romanian troops. By the end of the month, German and Romanian forces had killed at least 25,000 Jews in Odessa. The Jews who survived the initial massacre in Odessa were marched or deported to camps in other parts of Transnistria. Most were dead within a year. The situation was repeated all over Transnistria. For instance, in Bessarabia district, north of Odessa, a total of 31,000 Jews were transferred to German authorities. By the end of 1942, all had been murdered. At least 154,000 Romanian Jews were forced across the Transnistria River in 1941 and 1942 into Transnistria. Less than 50,000 remained alive in 1943. 30,000 Jews were killed in Odessa, while 31,000 Jews were killed in Bessarabia. 75,000 were killed in Golta. And scholars now estimate that close to 120,000 Romanian Jews died in Transnistria, along with 180,000 indigenous Jews. Jews resisted. They resisted during the deportation to Transnistria while imprisoned in the various camps. One of the largest efforts was led by a Jewish engineer, Siegfried Jagendorf, who in 1922 was appointed the director of operations for the Siemens circuit working in Moldavia. On October 12 of 1941, Jagendorf and the other 8,000 Jewish residents of Szczeciewicz, where he lived, were told they had to leave Romania with only 24-hour notice. They were instructed to gather at the train station the following morning, when they would be taken to an undesignated destination. The following day, Jagendorf and the other Jewish residents were packed into cattle cars, taken to the left bank of the Transnistria River, and then forced onto ferries and brought to the city of Moldavia, Podolsky, in Transnistria, a city which had suffered during the early fighting between Nazis and the Soviet forces. Recognizing that his engineering skills, along with the large pool of Jewish workers, could provide useful services to the city's prefect, Jagendorf offered to repair the city's power plant and restore electricity and running water to the city. In return, he asked that he and the needed Jewish workers stay in Moldavia rather than be sent on to any of the concentration camps. Reluctantly, the prefect agreed, and Jagendorf created a list of 116 Jews who would do the work. Within a month, they had the power plant operating and had begun to work on various other projects, including repairing the factory that made farm equipment and machine parts, rebuilding offices and houses, and restoring the city's flour mill. In assigning Jewish workers to these projects, Jagendorf saved between 10,000 to 15,000 Jews from deportation to the concentration camp and almost certain death. Despite the willingness by the Romanian leaders, to deport Jews from the eastern regions to Transnistria, and their active involvement of the mass murder of over 200,000 Jews in 1941, Romanian leaders refused to cooperate with the Nazi calls for the deportation of the remaining Romanian Jews to Nazis' killing centers in 1941. By the fall of 1942, a combination of factors, including German defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad, the need for Jewish laborers, and the changing tide of the war, led the Romanian dictator Ion Antonescu to halt all further deportation. Beginning in December of that year, Antonescu even began to repatriate the Romanian Jews who had been deported to Transnistria. By then, however, only one-third of the deported Romanian Jews in Transnistria remain alive. In August of 1944, after the Red Army had regained control of the area, the former Romanian king Michael I ousted Ion Antonescu from power, declared an immediate ceasefire with the Soviet Union, and changed sides so that the Romanians joined the forces with the Allies. In the wake of the war, the government of Romania held a series of trials which found more than 600 people guilty for war crimes in Romania. Ion Antonescu and 3 other leaders from his government were executed. Hundreds of others were given lengthy prison sentences, although some were later commuted. In hindsight, the decision that halted the deportation of Romanian Jews in 1942 and the later change in power came too late to save the 300,000 Jews who had been murdered in Transnistria. 300,000. Almost as many Jews were killed in Transnistria as in the killing centers of Sobibor and Telsminio combined. More Jews were murdered in Bogdanovka than in Babi Yar. But despite the scale of the killing in this one narrow swath of land, there is little public awareness of the horrors of the Holocaust in Transnistria. Public attraction has focused instead on the industrialized murder at the 6 Nazi killing centers where memorials were established in the immediate aftermath of the war. The fact that archival records in the Soviet Union were closed to Western scholars during the Cold War further hindered the study of the Holocaust in Romania and the Ukraine. The Soviet narrative, which de-emphasized Jewish victims and highlighted the dangers of fascism, is one more reason that the events in Transnistria were ignored. The most important reason, however, to explain why the history of the Holocaust in Transnistria has been overlooked was deliberate. It was a deliberate suppression of information about Romanian involvement, which remained the official policy into the post-communist era. Only in 2004, with the release of the final report from the International Commission on the Holocaust in Romania, headed by Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel, did Romania acknowledge its role in the Holocaust. In the wake of the Wiesel report, Historians has looked further or closely at the events in Romania and the Western Ukraine. New books, memorials, exhibitions like this one seek to restore Transnistria to the historical record.